He sat there, leaning back in his director's chair like he owned the entire office, throwing me that condescending smirk and those words that cut like a blade. "Why don't you do something productive for once?" He thought I'd bow my head and take the humiliation. He had no idea those words would be the fuse. I'd spent 7 years building this company. Every number, every report, every client relationship, and I knew exactly what he was hiding in those numbers. If he wanted me to do something productive, I would, and it would be the final blow that buried his career. My name is Lauren Bennett, and I've been a senior financial analyst at Northbridge Analytics for 7 years. That Tuesday morning in March started like any other coffee in hand. Laptop charged, presentation polished to perfection. I'd spent 3 weeks preparing this cost reduction strategy for our biggest client, a Fortune 500 manufacturing company that trusted us with their operational efficiency. The numbers were beautiful: 42% reduction in supply chain redundancies, $18 million in projected annual savings. This was the kind of work that had earned me 3 promotions and the respect of everyone who understood what real analysis looked like. The conference room was packed at 9:30 a.m. sharp. The entire analytics team, junior associates, even some folks from marketing had shown up. Martin Crowe sat at the head of the table, his 2-month-old nameplate gleaming like his artificially whitened teeth. He'd brought his cronies from his previous company, 3 yes-men who knew nothing about data but everything about corporate politics. I was 15 slides in, explaining the implementation timeline, when Martin raised his hand, not to ask a question, no, that would have been too respectful. He raised it like a traffic cop stopping a speeding car. "Lauren, Lauren, Lauren," he said, each repetition dripping with condescension. "This is all very thorough, but I'm not seeing the innovation here. Where's the disruption, the paradigm shift?" The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. My colleagues shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Sarah from my team caught my eye, her expression a mix of sympathy and secondhand embarrassment. "This strategy is based on proven methodologies and actual data analysis," I responded, keeping my voice steady. "The client specifically requested—" "The client," Martin interrupted, standing up now for maximum theatrical effect, "hired us to think outside the box, not to give them a glorified Excel spreadsheet dressed up in PowerPoint." My hands gripped the presentation clicker so tight I thought it might crack. 7 years of successful projects, millions saved for clients, relationships built on trust and results dismissed with a wave of his manicured hand. "Perhaps," he continued, now addressing the room more than me, "if you spent less time buried in historical data and more time understanding modern business dynamics, you'd produce something actually useful." The word hung in the air like a slap. Useful, as if everything I'd done, every late night, every breakthrough that had kept this company profitable, meant nothing. "In fact," Martin said, gathering his papers with exaggerated disappointment, "why don't you step back from this project entirely? Let someone with fresh perspectives handle it. Maybe you can find something productive to do. Something more, suited to your traditional approach." He left the room, his entourage trailing behind like obedient puppies. The silence that followed was deafening. 23 professionals, people I'd worked with for years, couldn't meet my eyes. Some stared at their phones. Others suddenly found their notebooks fascinating. Sarah finally broke the silence. "Lauren, that was—" "Don't," I said, packing up my laptop with hands that barely trembled. "Just don't." I made it to the bathroom before the rage fully hit. In the mirror, I saw a 34-year-old woman who'd given everything to this company, reduced to nothing by a man who wouldn't recognize real analysis if it was presented in neon lights and interpretive dance. My reflection looked tired, defeated, but behind my eyes, something else was building. Not just anger determination. Martin Crowe had just made the biggest mistake of his career. He wanted me to do something productive. Fine, I'd be more productive than he could possibly imagine, because I knew things about him, about his numbers, about the creative accounting he thought nobody would notice. The humiliation burned, but it was already transforming into something else, something cold and calculated, something that would make him regret ever walking into Northbridge Analytics before Martin arrived. Northbridge Analytics had been something special. Our founder, Patricia Hartley, had built the company on principles that actually meant something: transparency, data integrity, and respect for expertise. She'd hired me straight from my master's program, saw potential where others saw just another analyst with big dreams. Under her leadership, we'd grown from 12 employees to 73, landed Fortune 500 clients, and maintained a 94% employee retention rate. Patricia announced her retirement last December, promoting our CFO, Thomas Wright, to CEO. Thomas was competent but weak, the kind of leader who confused avoiding conflict with maintaining peace. When the board suggested bringing in fresh blood for the director position, Thomas folded immediately. Enter Martin Crowe, with his Harvard MBA, his TED Talk about disrupting data analytics, and his snake oil salesman smile. The transformation was swift and brutal. Within his first week, Martin implemented what he called efficiency protocols, mandatory 7 a.m. meetings where he'd pontificate about synergy while contributing nothing substantial. He eliminated our flexible work-from-home policy, insisting innovation happens face-to-face. The quarterly performance reviews Patricia had designed to help employees grow became weapons for Martin to weed out anyone who questioned him. First to go was Robert Kim, our lead data scientist with 15 years of experience. Robert made the mistake of correcting Martin's interpretation of statistical significance during a client call. By Friday, Robert was packing his desk, officially leaving to pursue other opportunities. We all knew the truth. Then came the hiring spree. Martin brought in 6 people from his previous company, Data Vision Corp., a firm that had mysteriously pivoted to new markets after Martin's departure. His imports knew nothing about actual analytics. Jessica Thorne, his new senior strategy consultant, couldn't interpret a basic regression analysis. Marcus Webb, appointed as innovation director, spent his days creating PowerPoints full of buzzwords and circle graphs that said nothing. They were paid 40% above market rate, while those of us doing actual work watched our bonus pool shrink. The workspace itself changed. Our open, collaborative environment became a hierarchy of glass offices. Martin took the corner suite. Of course, installing a putting green and a 60-inch monitor he used primarily for YouTube videos about thought leadership. The break room conversations died. People ate lunch at their desks, afraid to be seen, not being productive. But the worst part was watching the quality of our work deteriorate. Martin's approach was all flash, no substance. He pushed for quantity over quality, fast turnarounds over accurate analysis. Client presentations became style over substance affairs with animated transitions and stock photos of diverse professionals pointing at charts. The actual data, buried in appendices nobody would read. I remember the Winchester Global project particularly well. Sarah and I had spent 2 months analyzing their supply chain, identifying $16 million in potential savings through specific, actionable changes. Martin took one look at our report and demanded we sexy it up. The final presentation he delivered to Winchester barely mentioned our findings, focusing instead on blockchain integration and AI-driven solutions that were technically impossible with their current infrastructure. The client was confused but too polite to say so. We lost the renewal. Our long-standing clients started asking questions. David Ortiz from Pinnacle Manufacturing called me directly one afternoon. "Lauren, what's happening over there? This isn't the Northbridge quality we're paying for." I couldn't tell him the truth. Not then. I just assured him we were going through some transitions. The old Northbridge team started leaving, one by one, not fired, but worn down, exhausted by the constant battle between doing good work and playing Martin's games. My friend Jennifer from the Chicago office texted me at 10:30 p.m. one night, "I can't do this anymore. Found a position at McKenna Associates. You should get out too." But I stayed, partly from stubbornness, partly from a misguided loyalty to what Northbridge used to be. I watched Martin systematically destroy everything Patricia had built, replacing competence with cronyism, integrity with illusion. The company that had been my professional home for 7 years was becoming unrecognizable. Every morning at 6:45 a.m., I'd park in the same spot I'd used for years and stare at the building, remembering what it used to represent. Excellence, innovation based on actual insights, not empty jargon. a place where expertise mattered more than ego. Now it was Martin's kingdom, built on hollow promises and propped up by people who wouldn't recognize real analytics if it was spelled out in giant neon letters. And those of us who remembered the before times, we were just obstacles to be removed or humiliated into submission. The culture hadn't just changed, it had rotted from the inside out, and Martin was the infection. It started innocently enough. 3 days after the humiliation, I was reviewing quarterly reports for damage control, trying to salvage what I could of the client presentation Martin had killed. That's when I noticed the first discrepancy. A line item for market research consultation worth $87,000, billed to the Morrison Industries project. Strange. I'd led that project for 6 months, and we'd never commissioned any external research. I pulled up the original budget I'd submitted versus the final client invoice. The numbers didn't match. Not by a small margin either. We'd billed Morrison Industries an extra $200,000 beyond what our actual costs justified. The overcharge was hidden across multiple categories: consulting fees, software licenses, proprietary analytical tools that didn't exist in our inventory. My pulse quickened. This wasn't a clerical error. This was deliberate. Over the next week, I stayed late at the office, long after Martin and his crew had left for their 5:30 p.m. happy hours. The pattern became clearer with each report I examined. Every project Martin had touched since arriving showed similar inflation. The excess funds were being channeled through vendor payments to 3 companies: Crow Consulting LLC, Meridian Analytics Group, and North Star Solutions. A quick search revealed what I suspected. Crow Consulting LLC had been registered just 2 months ago, coincidentally when Martin joined Northbridge. The address listed a virtual office in Delaware. Meridian Analytics Group had no web presence, no LinkedIn employees, no digital footprint whatsoever, except for invoices in our system. North Star Solutions was registered to Martin's brother-in-law in Nevada. Shell companies. Martin was embezzling funds through fake vendors, inflating client bills to cover the theft. I sat back in my chair at 11:45 p.m. on a Thursday, staring at the evidence on my screen. The smart move would be to walk away, find another job, let someone else deal with this mess. Martin had already shown he could destroy my reputation with a few choice words. If I came forward without ironclad proof, he'd spin it as a bitter employee making wild accusations. But then I remembered his smirk. "Something productive," he'd said. The dismissive wave of his hand. The way my colleagues had looked away, too embarrassed to defend 7 years of proven excellence. I opened a new encrypted folder on my personal cloud drive and began systematically documenting everything. Screenshots of the original budgets, the inflated invoices, wire transfer records showing payments to the shell companies, email threads where Martin specifically instructed accounting to process these vendors without the usual verification procedures, always copying his imported yes men, but never anyone from the original Northbridge team. The most damning evidence came from an unexpected source. While searching for more vendor information, I found Martin's previous company had undergone a mysterious restructuring 6 months before he left. Digging deeper through industry newsletters and LinkedIn posts from former employees, I pieced together a pattern: unusual vendor payments, inflated project costs, a sudden departure of their CFO. Then Martin's convenient exit just before an internal audit was announced. He'd done this before, and he'd gotten away with it. By 2:15 a.m., I had documented over $3 million in fraudulent charges across 8 projects, but I needed more than numbers. I needed the smoking gun, something that directly tied Martin to these shell companies beyond circumstantial evidence. That's when I remembered the printer. Our office printer kept logs of everything, including documents sent to print remotely. Martin, being the technological dinosaur he was, still printed everything, including, I discovered, bank statements for Crow Consulting LLC that he'd accidentally sent to the shared printer instead of his personal one. The statement showed regular transfers from Crow Consulting to Martin's personal account, deposits that matched, to the dollar, the amounts we'd paid to his shell company, minus a small percentage probably kept in the business account for appearances. I photographed the statement with my phone before shredding it. He'd never know it had been printed. My hands were steady now, my mind crystal clear. This wasn't about revenge anymore, though that would be a delicious bonus. This was about justice, about protecting the company I'd helped build, about showing everyone who'd sat silent in that conference room what real productivity looked like. Martin thought he was untouchable. He had no idea he'd just challenged someone who knew every financial trail in this company, someone with the patience to follow each thread to its source, someone with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. The game was on, and I was going to win. The plan required patience and precision. I couldn't just dump evidence on someone's desk and hope for the best. Martin had too many allies, too much charm to talk his way out of a rushed accusation. I needed to be methodical, invisible, and absolutely bulletproof in my approach. First, I established a routine that would never raise suspicion. Every morning, I arrived at 7:30 a.m., 30 minutes after Martin's mandatory meeting ended. I'd grab coffee, exchange pleasantries with his imported cronies, and settle into the mundane tasks he'd assigned me: updating contact databases, formatting his presentations, organizing files. To anyone watching, I was a beaten-down employee, finally accepting her diminished role. But during lunch hours, when Martin held court at expensive restaurants with clients, I was documenting. I created a separate encrypted hard drive, hidden in a tampon box in my desk drawer, the one place I knew Martin's boys would never look. Every piece of evidence was backed up 3 ways: the encrypted drive, a cloud service accessed only through a VPN, and physical printouts stored in a safety deposit box I rented across town. The data collection system I built was beautiful in its simplicity. I wrote a small script that ran on my computer, appearing as a standard system update. What it actually did was capture screenshots of any financial documents accessed on the network, flagging transactions involving Martin's shell companies. Everything was time-stamped, verified, and cross-referenced. I learned Martin's patterns. He always processed suspicious invoices on Fridays after 3 p.m., when most of accounting had mentally checked out for the weekend. He used his personal laptop for emails about the shell companies, but connected to our Wi-Fi. Not knowing our IT system logged all traffic. He was arrogant enough to use his company credit card for lunches with the fake vendor representatives who were actually his brother-in-law and golf buddies. The smartest move was playing the defeated employee perfectly. When Martin walked by, I'd minimize my screen quickly, pretending to hide job search sites. I'd sigh audibly during his meetings, doodle in my notebook, project the image of someone counting days until they could leave. He ate it up, once patting my shoulder condescendingly and saying, "Hang in there, Lauren. Not everyone can be a visionary." Meanwhile, I was building a timeline. November Crow. Consulting registered. December 1st inflated invoice. January pattern established across multiple projects. February. 3 million embezzled. March. The confrontation that started this war. Each entry was supported by documents, emails, wire transfers, and photographs. I also started recording. Illinois is a 2-party consent state for recordings, but Martin had unknowingly agreed to be recorded when he signed our company handbook, which stated all conversations in the office could be monitored for quality assurance. I kept my phone recording during any interaction with him, capturing his instructions to inflate budgets, his jokes about creative accounting, his admission that the board doesn't understand modern business anyway. The most delicate part was maintaining my cover while gathering the most damaging evidence. I volunteered to help with month-end reports, claiming I needed to stay busy to keep my mind off my career disappointment. Martin, viewing this as final proof of my submission, approved immediately. This gave me legitimate access to financial systems I wouldn't normally touch. 3 weeks into my investigation, I found the golden ticket. Martin had been sloppy with an email, forgetting to delete it from the server. It was addressed to his brother-in-law. Process attached invoice through North Star by Thursday. Split is 70/30 as usual. Delete this after reading. The attached invoice was for consulting services that never happened, for a project that existed only on paper. I also discovered Martin was planning something bigger. Emails suggested he was setting up a 4th shell company, preparing to escalate his embezzlement before the annual audit in July. He was getting greedier, more reckless. The amounts were increasing. The last fake invoice was for $190,000. By late March, working until 1 or 2 a.m. most nights, I had assembled a prosecutorial case that would make any FBI agent weep with joy. Financial fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, tax evasion. Martin had committed enough federal crimes to earn a decade in prison, but I wasn't ready to strike yet. I needed allies. People who could ensure this bomb exploded exactly where it needed to. The beautiful irony was that Martin had given me the perfect cover story. Everyone expected me to leave soon, so when I started having lunch with former colleagues and industry contacts, nobody questioned it. They assumed I was networking for a new job. In reality, I was identifying who could help me destroy Martin Crowe completely. Late one night, reviewing my evidence for the 100th time, I allowed myself a small smile. Martin thought he'd humiliated me, broken me, reduced me to nothing. He had no idea he'd actually freed me, without a reputation to protect or a position to maintain. I could focus entirely on documenting his crimes. His arrogance had created his perfect enemy, someone with access, expertise, and absolutely nothing to lose. The productive little task he'd mockingly suggested I'd found it, and it would end him. Finding allies required careful navigation. I couldn't approach just anyone. Martin had eyes everywhere, and his imported loyalists reported everything back to him. I needed people with power, integrity, and their own reasons to want Martin gone. David Ortiz was my first and most crucial contact. We met for coffee on a Tuesday morning at a small cafe 5 miles from the office, far from any chance encounters with Northbridge personnel. David had been Pinnacle Manufacturing's CFO for 12 years and our client for 6. More importantly, he'd specifically requested me as his account analyst 3 years ago after I'd saved his company $4 million through supply chain optimization. "Lauren, you look tired," he said, studying me over his espresso. "It's been a challenging few months," I admitted, then pulled out a folder. "David, I need to show you something, but first I need your word this stays between us until I'm ready to move forward." His expression shifted from concern to business mode. "You have it." I showed him the invoices, the real ones I'd submitted for his account, and the inflated ones Martin had sent to Pinnacle. The color drained from his face as he recognized the implications. His company had been overcharged by $300,000 in just 4 months. "That bastard," David whispered, his hands tightening on the coffee cup. "We trusted Northbridge. We trusted him." "There's more," I said, showing him the pattern across other clients. "This isn't isolated. He's been doing this systematically, using shell companies to hide the stolen funds." David was silent for a long moment, then looked me straight in the eye. "What do you need from me?" "When the time comes, I need Pinnacle to demand a full audit of all Northbridge billing. Your voice carries weight with the board. They can't ignore a Fortune 500 client threatening to pull a $20 million annual contract." "You'll have more than that," David promised. "I play golf with Stuart Manning, Northbridge's board chairman. When you're ready, I'll make sure he hears about this personally." My next ally came from an unexpected source. Rachel Moore, who'd left Northbridge 6 months earlier, was now working an internal audit at Cypress Financial, one of our major partners. She reached out to me after hearing through the grapevine about my public humiliation. We met for lunch at 12:30 p.m. on a Thursday. Rachel looked better than she had in years, the stress lines gone, the spark back in her eyes. "I heard what Martin did to you," she said without preamble. "That man is poison. He tried the same power play with me before I left, but I didn't have the evidence to fight back." "What if I told you I did?" Rachel leaned forward, interested. I showed her selected pieces of my documentation. As an auditor, she immediately recognized the sophistication of Martin's scheme and the thoroughness of my evidence gathering. "This is federal crime territory," she said quietly. "The FBI would be very interested in this." "I know, but I need to make sure it's handled correctly. Martin has connections, charm, the ability to talk his way out of trouble. I need someone who understands forensic accounting to verify my findings independently." Rachel smiled for the first time. "Lucky for you, that's literally my job now. And Cypress Financial has a vested interest in ensuring our partners aren't engaged in fraud. Give me copies of everything. I'll run my own analysis and prepare a report that will be admissible in court if needed." The third ally was the most surprising. Thomas Wright, our weak CEO, approached me one afternoon at 4:45 p.m. as I was preparing to leave. He looked haggard, older than his 52 years. "Lauren, could we talk privately?" We walked to his car in the parking garage, away from any possible surveillance. Thomas was sweating despite the cool March air. "I know something's wrong," he said without preamble. "The numbers don't add up. Clients are asking questions I can't answer. And Martin, he's hiding something. But every time I try to investigate, he's got an explanation, a presentation, something to distract the board." I studied him carefully. This could be a trap. Martin testing my loyalty. But the desperation in Thomas's eyes seemed genuine. "If you really want to know what's happening," I said slowly, "you need to be prepared for how bad it actually is. And you need to be ready to act, not just worry." "I hired him," Thomas said miserably. "The board trusted my judgment. If he's doing what I think he's doing..." "It's not about blame right now," I said. "It's about stopping him before he destroys everything Patricia built. Are you willing to do that?" Thomas nodded, looking more decisive than I'd seen him in months. "Tell me what you know." I gave him a preview enough to confirm his suspicions, but not enough to compromise my full plan. Thomas went pale but stayed focused. "I'll start documenting everything from my end," he promised. "Board communications, anything irregular Martin has asked me to approve. And Lauren, when you're ready to move, you'll have my full support." By early April, I had assembled a powerful coalition of Fortune 500 CFO, a forensic auditor, and our own CEO. Each brought different strengths and access to different pressure points. David could mobilize client concerns. Rachel could provide independent verification, and Thomas could ensure internal support when the explosion came. But I wasn't done yet. I needed one more piece, someone inside Martin's inner circle, and I knew exactly who to target. Marcus Webb, his innovation director, had made a crucial mistake 3 weeks ago. He'd gotten drunk at a company happy hour and let slip that he was worried about some irregularities he'd noticed. Time to see if Marcus valued his freedom more than his loyalty to Martin. The final evidence came together like pieces of a complex puzzle, each element more damning than the last. Rachel's independent audit confirmed everything I'd found and more. Martin had actually stolen close to $4 million. Not the $3 million I'd initially calculated. She'd traced money flows through banking records that showed a clear pattern of fraud dating back to his first week at Northbridge. Working with Rachel was like watching a master artist. She reconstructed Martin's entire financial manipulation scheme, creating charts that clearly showed money flowing from Northbridge to shell companies to Martin's personal accounts. She even found evidence he'd been claiming personal expenses as business costs, his kids' private school tuition hidden as educational consulting, his wife's shopping sprees as client entertainment. The breakthrough with Marcus Webb came at 3:20 a.m. on a Wednesday. I'd been monitoring his emails legally, through our company's network surveillance system, when I noticed he'd been searching for whistleblower protection laws. He was scared. Perfect. I approached him that afternoon in the parking garage, making sure we